Never argue with an idiot. They will drag you down to their level and beat you with experience. What's your best real life example of this? I used to argue a lot with my sister when we were kids. She would do this thing where she would say something, and then I would reference back to it literally a minute or two later to prove a point, and she would say I never said that, or that's not what I said. Absolutely impossible to argue with someone who will just deny having said things that could hurt their argument. Also, trying to change the course of an argument if they feel like they are losing. A coworker once called me an idiot for doing something incorrectly when I was actually doing it the right way. When I politely explained to them that the way they suggested doing the task didn't actually work, they started asking, why are you getting so angry? I was just trying to help, etc. So now we're arguing about whether I'm angry or not instead of the right way to complete the task. When I tell people to just reboot your computer and it will fix all their problems, and yet they won't because they said, if you wait long enough it will shut down, when in reality it only goes to sleep. Then when I tell them they have to completely shut it down, they look at me like I'm an idiot and say they did. I tell them it seems like it, but it only went to sleep. They argue back. For a short while, I worked as a line cook at a Cracker Barrel, and there was a little saloon style door that led to the staff section, kitchen, bathroom, etc. There was a staff only sign on the door, above the doors, and on the wall behind the doors at eye level. Usually if someone from the customer side comes in, they said, coming in before opening the door, so they didn't hit anyone, but of course customers didn't know that. So when this dude opened the door and hit a waitress carrying a ton of drinks, we were reasonably upset with him. He said, you should really put a sign up. We showed him all the signs, and he goes, that seems a bit excessive. Working retail. Especially when I worked in the tech shop or the computer store. Trying to convince someone their $500 laptop is never going to be a gaming system, no matter how many of the very few replaceable parts we throw at it, can be exhausting. Had an employee sign a NDA about an upcoming art installation that had investors. He told everyone. He argued with me the NDA only meant he couldn't disclose anything with the people in the company. Was arguing with this dude about something math related. He didn't know how to read a study which involved statistics. Claimed he was in multiple AP math classes. Tried saying that I probably don't even know basic integration. Gave me a common integration problem. He wrote it but forgot the minus sign, making it unsolvable. I pointed it out and he edited the comment to make it correct. Told him that some people can see when you edit comments. He claimed that he just capitalized a letter. On and on and on. I'm showing my age here, but I used to work for an estate agency, and we had sales offices set up at the site of large new housing developments. Our primary method of communication was fax. One of the sales associates telephoned our office to say that the fax machine had run out of paper. No problem, I said, one of the guys is coming your way later for a house tour, I'll give him a box of paper to give to you. We then had an almost 20-minute long argument when they kept insisting, no, you just send me a blank fax because I need the paper, it will just come out of my fax machine. It was like trying to nail jelly to a tree. Difficult, irritating, and it achieved nothing. Once worked with a guy who, by his own admission, got his rocks off by picking fights. He'd start an argument over the smallest thing. If you said it was white, he'd say it was black, just to try to start something. The one that always stood out for me was the weather app competition. One day he asked me what temperature it was, so I read it off my weather app. He got all offended, because his weather app said it was a couple degrees warmer. So he decides we're going to have a weather app competition. He was going to chart what our apps said the temperature was, and at the end of the week, whichever one was closest to that day's high would be the winner. And the loser would have to start using the winner's app. To which I said, what is your effing problem? So, yeah. For the first few days, he'd make a big performance about marching into my office, recording the temperature off my app, jotting down some notes, and walking off. This started on a Monday. He gave up after Wednesday. Either because I was winning, or he was disappointed because, despite his best efforts, I just did not give a F about weather apps. Or maybe the boss told him to stop because I filed a complaint that this was bordering on harassment. Anytime I've tried to explain marginal tax rates to an employee. Social media debates. You won't convince someone they're wrong. You're screaming at a brick wall. Had a friend in university who was a world-class high school debater. Over meals, she liked to pick a ridiculous proposition and then talk circles around people until they had to concede to her point, no matter how absurd. When she tried it with me, I just stonewalled her. Met every point with a solid "I don't think that's true," or "that doesn't make sense." Eventually she gave up and never tried it with me again. It was the only time I've ever used the tactics of the stupid to win an argument. But, to be fair, if you're not arguing with me in good faith, I feel no obligation to respond in good faith. Not my story, but once my friend A, was having a friendly, turn sour, debate with another friend B, about how sometimes people just don't have a choice, in the context of, they can't just choose to live a frivolous life because of their family background, etc. Friend A proceeds to say, "What about starving children born in Africa? It's not like they had a choice." To which friend B answered, "WHO asked them to be born in Africa? Just don't be born there." That's when we knew. I thought I had a no-lose argument going up against someone who believes in homeopathy. I left the discussion feeling like I lost somehow. Edit. Appreciate all the comments. Some very funny replies. Just a quick clarification. I was specifically referring to homeopathic dilutions as far as the argument discussion went. I felt like I lost because I was dumbfounded by their argument and realized quickly that it was a belief system that I was up against and didn't want to waste either of our time. The person being a naturopath that my wife used to go to. They had obviously had this argument many times and had various convoluted responses to all your standard points. Essentially, they had more experience in this argument than me. Thankfully, that interaction resulted in my kids no longer having to take so much medicine, which was my main issue because I could see that it was eroding their confidence. Sure, it's just water so it can't do any harm, right? Wrong. It meant every time they saw the naturopath they would come home with a whole new set of ailments and the eventual thinking of what is wrong with me. There was never anything wrong with them. I was listening to a podcast once, and the host articulated something profound in a very well stated way. He said, I paraphrase, "I will never argue with a flat earther, or an anti-vaxxer, or any of those people. The reason is because that these people have made that into their whole identity, and they are prepared to address any possible argument I could come up with. And because I care about facts and truth and they do not, my only possible response would be, I'll have to look into that. I don't know off the top of my head." It doesn't matter that their response is incorrect or based on faulty research or has been rejected by the scientific community or whatever. By the time I discover that, they will be long gone and talking about how they won another debate. This is it in a nutshell. If you argue about an issue with someone who has made that one issue into the core of their persona, you will lose unless you are someone who has made arguing against that issue also into the core of your persona. Of course I know that Andrew Wakefield is a liar and a scammer, and of course I know that Apollo astronauts placed retror reflectors on the moon, which can be used to prove that they went there, and that their photos of the spherical Earth are real, because I've done enough research to convince myself. But have I done enough research to convince someone who refuses to be convinced? And someone who has also done that research, and come up with plausible sounding nonsense to counter each of these arguments? Why would I waste my life doing this? People who tell me they feel like something is or isn't illegal, when I know they're wrong but insist they know what they are talking about. For the record, I'm not a lawyer yet, but I'm about to start my final year of law school, and my undergrad is in legal studies. In one particular instance, I took a very specialized course that taught drone law. The person I was this with kept telling me I was wrong because they felt like. I asked a representative from the friend of the court to explain something she said and she told me that I understood what she was saying. I replied that I wouldn't have asked her to explain if I had understood. She said if I was going to be difficult, she would hold me in contempt. My ex chimed in that she didn't quite understand what she had said and was greeted with a smile and an explanation. From that point on I always disagreed with the friend of the court on everything, so that I could be seen by the actual court and a judge. I had a co-worker for a few years. I tried to give him advice on doing a job that I had been doing for years. He repeatedly told me he didn't appreciate my advice, that he had won awards in his past job and to stay in my lane. Finally we did a project together and he admitted that I really did know what I was talking about and he actually thanked me. But he continued to gaslight people and be a narcissist. So many times. So, I'm on my condo board, again. Sigh. Because being on the board means a lot of dealing with idiots. The worst thing is, they aren't normally stupid people, most of them, until they focus on some minor issue. Anyway, sensor for the lights in our laundry room failed. We replaced it. I get a knock on my door from an owner, who I'll call Bonnie, because F Bonnie. Anyway, she's upset because the sensor still isn't working properly. Now, the issue is the lights won't turn off. I stood in there for 15 minutes, and they didn't turn off. It wastes electricity. Bonnie, the sensor keeps the lights on as long as somebody is in the room. And you were in the room. So, the lights couldn't turn off. That's tech condensed version. So, after about 10 minutes of her not grasping that being in the room means the light sensor won't turn them off. Well, the laundry room is in sight of my condo. So, when we hit the 10-minute mark, and she's not in the room but instead, in my face, the lights go off. And I point that out. I thought you said you would be a good president. Thank God she's now so scared of me she wouldn't say shit with a mouthful. My brother-in-law loves to have debates where he just wants to hear himself talk to make himself feel smarter. His arguments include "I haven't heard of that before, so it must not be true," and pulling argument points from YouTube videos on the topic because he doesn't read. Why would I when I can get the info faster from a video? He sprays paint as his career and has never been to college but took calculus in high school, and that is his proof he is smarter than everyone else. When it is brought up all he says is, "Oh yeah, I remember calculus, it is as easy." What is it about? You know. Calculus. Easy stuff. I stopped engaging him on his debates when he just claimed everything was a government job and everything was fake news. Didn't see it on YouTube. A friend was going through a particularly nasty divorce. His wife was the one who cheated, but she blamed him for destroying their family because she couldn't live with the guilt, like many cheaters do. Every time he would regularly turn up to pick up their kids, the same thing would happen. She would march down to his car and scream and swear at him for the few minutes it took for the kids to gather their stuff together. He would keep his window wound up, turn the radio up and ignore her, every time. This just made her scream louder, of course, until her face was red and veins were popping. She would call him the worst husband in the world, tell him how everything was his fault, how if he had earned more money none of this would have happened, and anything else she could think of to hurt him. One day she found his weak spot, and picked a topic to scream at him about that really got to him. After everything she'd done, he couldn't stand her hypocrisy. So he wound his window down and started to angrily answer her. He saw her blind, seething rage change instantly to look of absolute delight. She'd got to him, and that was all she'd wanted. And besides, how could he think he was any better than her if they were both arguing with each other, especially when the kids could hear them? He stopped in his tracks, and didn't even finish what he was saying. He smiled, said not worth it, wound his window back up and went back to staring straight ahead and ignoring her. She eventually got tired of screaming insults at him when she was never able to get another rise out of him. It's years later now. The kids are grown, and they all have a much better relationship with him than with her because he always put them first. Go figure. Trying to get an old person to understand new technology when they have already decided against using it. My grandmother refused to use the stacking washer dryer in her retirement apartment because it was too complicated. Same buttons as the one at her previous home, just in a slightly different place. My mom complaining how my generation wouldn't know how to do anything if it wasn't posted on the internet. I simply responded, well, what else is that generation supposed to do when the generation that raised them didn't teach them how to do anything? Keep in mind this while I'm moving files from her old Windows 8 laptop to her new Windows 10 for her, via flash drive. She can't figure it out because Windows 10 is totally different. Obviously, it's not. When I was a child, a teacher argued with me about how my name is pronounced. Some sports guy had a first name that was spelled the same as my surname, and I guess that was the only acceptable pronunciation, regardless of what little 10-year-old me tried to tell her. My good buddy wrote his capstone thesis on something about Islam. The dude spoke Arabic, is smart as hell, a history nut, and consumes books like they are Skittles. Anyway, he got into a long debate on Reddit with someone. He started showing sources, teaching the guy, etc. Anyway, he was about 500 words into a mega retort when he decided to actually look up the dude's posting history. Turns out that dude was a drink your own urine evangelist. I feel like that is Reddit in a nutshell. Someone posted an article that provided direct evidence against what he was claiming. Pointed it out and he said, I didn't know it was in that article or I wouldn't have used that one. A driver fell asleep at the wheel for a brief moment. The passenger noticed the car drift into the oncoming lane and exclaimed, Jesus Christ, in fear. The driver woke up and turned the car back to their lane. It was impossible to have the passenger, and their whole family, admit this was not evidence that Jesus himself saved them. I was exhausted by the end of that conversation. There are cat litter boxes in schools for people that identify as cats. One Google search will show that is not true. I am open to changing my mind if there is evidence. Others will not research to see if it's true. Okay, this'll get buried, but it was and still is hilarious to me. Way back in the day I was a bill collector for travel trailers and mobile homes. This woman had promised to mail her check for the payment, and lo and behold it doesn't appear. So I call her, and reference back to our prior conversation I say, you promised you'd mail this to me, and it never arrived. This wasn't particularly contentious. It more along the lines of, I thought we had an agreement and now I'm disappointed. So this woman, who was probably 30, really dumb and kinda country, says to me, I did mail it. But the post office figured out that I didn't have enough money and sent it back to me so it wouldn't bounce. My sarcastic reply, I don't understand how that could happen. She responds, completely sincere, I don't understand it either, literally wordless after that one. I grew up Jewish in Oklahoma. I ran into this a lot. Had a classmate in middle school try to convince me that Christianity predates Judaism. I told him, but Jesus was Jewish. His response, exactly. No irony. Totally genuine. Conversation over. I work at a club where the bouncer gives you a card when you enter. The card has multiple lines with squares on it, each one being a different drink, vodka, gin, tequila, etc. And the barman just make an X on the drinks you order. All mixers are free except Red Bull. At the top of the card there's a line that reads Red Bull Mix. It's also the cheapest thing on the card. I've had a customer order a Red Bull Mix, and literally argue with me for about 10 minutes demanding that I serve it, while I calmly explain to them that line is only a mixer, and they actually have to order something else. They eventually asked for a manager that just told me to mark it, and serve them a shot of Red Bull. The look on the customer was priceless. They were as pleased they won the argument as they were disappointed paying €2.50 for a sip of Red Bull. I told my dog it's not time for dinner. He continued to whine and say otherwise. This went on until 5 minutes before dinner time. He got dinner time 5 minutes early. Not saying my mother is an idiot, but boy does she lean hard on some stupid beliefs. For example, I bring up that European countries have universal healthcare. Sweden is a good example, and she immediately fires up the "but they are taxed to death to pay for it" argument. In my research, a US resident gets taxed about 12% more, 42% on income, than a Swedish resident, 30% on income. My 80-plus-year-old father arguing that they were putting blood clots in COVID vaccines. Why? I don't know, but there was a panel of 6 scientists that said so. What panel and where? Never mind, I'll Google it. Yeah, nothing. Here's the report on the blood clots. 2 women on birth control from a minuscule test base. The percent is less than 0.01%. Where did you get that information? CDC.com. Oh well, there's the problem. I threw up my hands and walked away. There's literally zero response to something that stupid. When I was in high school I was super into making constructed languages. I spent a lot of time working on them, though I never finished any. One day I went to school, and I showed a friend the writing system I had been working on, which used a system where every possible consonant-vowel pairing had its own symbol, which mind you, is a fairly common way of writing that's used across the world. Japanese, lots of languages in the Indian subcontinent, etc. This guy said this kind of writing system was too confusing and I should use something else. So I told him what I just told y'all, that this style of writing is common across the world, and gave the India example. He tells me that apparently the writing systems used in the Indian subcontinent is the reason it's so terrible and why everyone there is quote, shitting in the streets unquote. I was baffled. I gave the Japan example, and he told me that apparently the only reason Japan is where it is now is because of American occupants in the 20th century. I was honestly so baffled at his racism I couldn't even say anything else, so I did the smartest thing and dropped the conversation. In one rehab I went to, I had to go to many before getting sober. They really forced me to accept that God is the only one who could save me. I'm an atheist. And I mean they forced me like they punished me by taking away any other activities until I admitted that. And I know what anyone who is sober from AA is thinking. You're supposed to try it, it's part of rehab. But I'd been to other rehabs and they were not abusive like this place. This place felt like some extremist shit where they even withheld my medications at one point, and intentionally cut us off from anyone outside. They had it set up so you're in the middle of an arid desert, so if you leave you're just out in the elements until you can find someone to come get you. But anyways, the arguments I had with them really fit the topic of this thread. It would just go in circles and I'd try to bring my logic into it that I can't really accept that I can't help myself and only God could save me. This is literally what is said during the 12 steps. It's all about accepting God as the only one to save you. So basically a cult. I told them so many times that it goes against all of my values to just accept this narrative just because I'm desperate to get sober. They literally said you have the gift of desperation. It's a blessing you're desperate to try believing in God. That sentiment made me sick. But every argument was an argument about how you can't disprove God exists, therefore you must try. And that if God is real, you get an amazing life after life, but if he isn't real you don't lose anything by believing in him. It's just typical Pascal's wager. It's hard to even put into words how bull and draining these forced discussions were, without writing a book lol. I had an argument with my super religions friend about same-sex marriage. He spewed the same talking points that you hear from all the right-wing religious conservatives, then ultimately ended the argument with the slippery slope position of, then what's next, you want to allow anyone to just marry anyone, so you're fine if a guy wants to marry a pillow, at which point I had to bow out. Fast forward a few weeks and I find myself in another argument with a different person about a subject I can't recall. But at some point I got so frustrated I yelled to him. So what? You'd be just fine if a man wanted to marry a pillow? You're just okay with a society where men can marry pillows? I'm a moron. I have a coworker that has a hard time doing stuff he deems unnecessary and will question it. If you try to explain why something is necessary you will always end up in an argument that will only waste time and energy. But if you only answer things like, because in a very clear tone he will do as you say,